Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Todd. Welcome to the Dr. Todd Show. And in today's episode, I am going to be talking about a phenomenon that oftentimes happens when people have experienced emotional trauma, and particularly with effigism. And that is this experience of an internal emotional collapse. And I'll be telling a little bit about my story, as well as some of the clients that I have worked with, as well as reading some of your viewer email. So let's get going. So let me start by telling you a story about Jerry. Jerry was a guy who I met in high school when I was about 16 years old. So when I was 16, my parents got a divorce, and my sister went to go live with my mom, and I went to go live with my dad. And we moved to a new suburb, and I started in a new school. And when I went there, I didn't know anybody, right? And by this time, I was a full-fledged kind of teenage dropout, druggy kind of guy, right? Who with the long hair, and I'd wear the army coats and the tattered jeans and all of that kind of stuff, right? I mean, that whole ensemble. And most of the people that I kind of gravitated toward were, other troubled people, right? I mean, these were all people who had some difficulties at home and had been struggling. Many of them had been in jail before. Many of them had been arrested before. And then there was this guy, Jerry. And Jerry was one of these just a genuinely nice guy. Everybody liked him, and he was just kind and just funny. And for whatever reason, he must have thought that I was a pretty cool guy. And so he reached out and started chatting with me, and we would hang out a bit. And I remember at the time, I'm like, I don't know how to act like that, right? I mean, he's the things that he's saying and kind of the things that he's doing feel so foreign to me. But he's just such a cool guy that I want to hang out with him. And so, he'd invite me over to his house at lunchtime, and his mom would make sandwiches and all of that kind of stuff. And his dad would come down and shake my hand and be like, "Hey, pal, how are you doing? What's going on? And how are things?" And it was such a weird experience after, growing up in the kind of house that I did. But it felt really good. And I could tell that, these people were just genuinely kind people. They had lots of friends, and the whole family was very musical. The dad was a very successful musician, and did piano repair on the side, and all the brothers were musicians, and just all of them were the same. They were just very, very nice people. And we'd sit up in his, they had this like little music studio area up in their attic where we would listen to Frank Zappa records and all of that kind of stuff. And it was really so cool. And then I remember one night I was at their house, and I don't remember what I had walked into the kitchen to get something. I think it was something to drink or something like that. And when I walked back into the living room, here's Jerry's dad and Jerry sitting next to each other. And Jerry's dad's got his arm around him, and they were chatting, and they both looked at me, and they were smiling. And I just got this sinking feeling. It was like this painful realization of what I didn't have. And I could just feel my insides collapse, and it was physically painful. I felt like I was going to puke, not because of the wonderful family this was, but it was just such a reminder of what I didn't have and how desperately I wanted to have that kind of relationship with my father. And I felt myself go white and just the blood drain out of my face. I felt just this pain in my gut and just what I describe as just this internal emotional collapse where my insides I just was like, oh, I just feel so horrible. And I could feel emotionally myself collapsing and just this visceral emptiness and sinking in my gut. And I turned and I walked out the door into the night. I didn't say anything to them. I just walked out. And I went out by myself into the dark where I now felt better. I now felt safer. I felt like I was now surrounded by the very darkness that makes me feel more comfortable. That was so beautiful. But that was something that was such a painful reminder of what I didn't have that it made me want to puke. And it was several months later before I talked to Jerry again. And he was just like, hey man, I hope everything's okay. I mean, they weren't even upset. They were just like, are you all right, dude? Are you okay? And again, I couldn't put words to what had happened that night because I didn't know how to make sense of it. But there was just this sense of collapse that happened. And this is a very common phenomenon that I see in people who have grown up in effigistic homes, right? Where something can get triggered. Something where we feel embarrassed, something where we feel like we did something wrong, something where we feel vulnerable, something that is a reminder or a trigger of the thing that we so desperately wanted, but felt it just had all this pain around. And we could just go into this, what I call internal emotional collapse, where it's just like we could just feel ourselves drop. We just feel our insides collapse. It feels like our whole body is just sinking in and just our insides are dropping out, and there's this painful sense of emptiness and pain. And oftentimes we can't even, in those moments, it's like we can't even describe what's going on. I mean, I had a client one time where I was working with this couple, and one of the partners was going into that, and I would ask them, what's happening, what's going on, and they literally were just sitting there kind of frozen. And I said, are you experiencing just an internal collapse right now? And they just nodded their head, and I was like, cool. I really believe that there is just kind of a neurological sneeze that happens where all of a sudden there's this short-term, just emotional flooding that occurs. And when we're in the middle of that, it is like we can't talk. We don't know what to say. We just know that we are just in an incredible amount of distress and an incredible amount of pain. And it just feels so empty and so hurtful and so painful. And it just kind of nails you right here, right? This kind of just this sinking feeling. And fortunately, that does get better as you go through and heal. But that is a very, very real phenomenon that happens with people who grow up in an effigistic home. And a lot of that, I think, having reflected on that a lot, I think a lot of it comes from we want so desperately, right, to be loved. We want so desperately to feel connected. We want so desperately to feel okay. and for there to be some repair, right? For us to be able to finally get some validation and some recognition, to be seen and loved and valued for who we are. And when we have never had that, and in fact that part of ourself has been actively undermined, there is just this part of us that just yearns for that. And in order to survive and cope, we have to just kind of put a lid on that and try to, use our kind of cognitive assets to plan and strategize and try to figure out how to live life, but we're not fully engaged here in our life. We do a lot of things and we can be really successful in some areas. We might, excel in college, we may excel in business because, we're living in the mind, in the cognitive part of our brain, and really focus on doing things so that we don't have to experience that painful craving just to be seen and to be validated, right? And then when something happens, right, like we're at a movie and we see something where there's like a relational thing between a parent and a child, or between partners, or something happens and all of a sudden it's like, oof, that gets triggered. We could just go into that emotional collapse. That actually happened to me a number of years ago, unexpectedly. I went to go see the movie Joker. And this is the one with Joaquin Phillips. Is that his name? No. What's his name? Joaquin Phoenix, I think. In any event, somebody is going to leave a comment and say, no, it's Joaquin, blah, 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 dummy. And for whatever reason, it's slipping my mind. But anyways, it's that one. It's none of the Batman Returns or anything like that. It's just called Joker. And, whoever wrote the script for that movie understood emotional trauma. Because when I watched some of the behavior that Joker did, there's no way that somebody who did not understand or had not experienced emotional trauma would have known about those things. For example, there was one part of the film where Joker opens up the refrigerator and pulls everything out onto the floor and then climbs inside and closes the door. And I was like, my God, I've done that. Mine was a closet, but it was the exact same thing. I knew exactly what he was doing. I knew exactly what was going on. In that moment, he felt just so overwhelmed and so vulnerable that he had to get into a box, right? He just had to escape. He had to be protected from the world around him. And I've done that where I've pulled clothes out and climbed into a wardrobe and closed the door. Because then it's like I needed that just to help stabilize my sense of self. Because I was going into that emotional collapse, and it's like I need to protect myself. And what was interesting is after watching that movie, my wife and I walked out into the parking lot, and we got in the car, and I wept for about a half an hour. And at the time, I didn't really realize what was going on, and this was before I wrote my first trauma book, and was actually one of the key moments that made me decide to write that book, because I saw myself in what was happening on the screen with that character, and all of the constantly feeling betrayed of people that he trusted, and always being blamed for, just for being him, and being gaslit by his mother, and just all of these things. The dad had abandoned them, and just all of these things. And we never know when we are going to get triggered, right? And when one of those emotional collapses is going to happen. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she was talking about a friend of hers who was really struggling. She too grew up in an effigistic family and was really, really struggling with her sense of self, and just has been in this kind of extended, deep state of emotional collapse where it's like, what's the point? I am such a horrible person. Nobody will ever love me. I feel this pain. I cannot stand it anymore, and I just want out. And she had recently become involved in a relationship with somebody who was awesome, who loved her despite the fact that she had all of this history of struggle and had experienced abuse and trauma and all of this, and was really struggling emotionally. He's like, that's fine. I don't care. I think you're delightful. I enjoy spending time with you. I want you in my life. And she was thinking about ending the relationship because she felt in this collapsed state, she was just like, I cannot tolerate being in a relationship with somebody who's wonderful, even though that would be the very thing that would help her evolve and grow. But I get it, because that's what happened to me that night in Jerry's living room when I saw this beautiful family, and I was standing looking at them, feeling just like so worthless, and just that disparity. That's the part that can just be so painful, is seeing that disparity between somebody who is loving and all of that and what we feel inside, right? And that disparity can just really amplify the pain of what we're feeling and make us want to pull away or escape or just run out into the night like I did. And that's exactly what she wants to do, is just pull away from that, from the very relationship that would help her grow and help her internalize a sense of being loved. But because there's that difference between that, the experience that he wants to provide for her and her internal world, that tension between those two really triggers that emotional collapse. And she's like, I want to get away. And this is one of the reasons, honestly, why oftentimes we will put ourselves in situations and get ourselves involved in relationships where we don't have to get triggered. We don't have to have that. We don't have to be faced with the wound in the same way. We know how to operate in dysfunctional environments. What we don't know how to do is we don't know how to receive love. We don't know how to navigate healthy interaction and healthy exchange, because first of all, that was never modeled to many of us. And the other part is that there's a part of us that just has been so wounded around there that getting involved in a healthy relationship feels scary and it feels painful. And there is this worry that, oh my God, as soon as you know how worthless I really am as a human being and what a mess up I am, or how just inherently unworthy I am, I know exactly what's going to happen. you're going to be like, maybe this isn't such a great idea after all. Maybe I need to start seeing some other people, right? And this will just be, again, a reminder of how unlovable I really am. And I want you to know that if you're experiencing that, internal emotional collapse, that when you're in that moment, just remember that what feels real may not be real. Just because you feel like you're awful, like you're a loser, like nobody would ever want you, like you're completely broken, you can't do anything right, all of those scripts that we get when we are the failed state proxy, right? When we are the person who is constantly being undermined, and we get all of those messages of, I'm the loser, I'm the bad one, I'm the sick one, I'm the. Then all of a sudden we're in a position where somebody cool comes along and somebody nice comes along, and we're like, we don't know how to navigate that. And oftentimes that can be really triggering, and we want to pull away from that. But part of the recovery from growing up in an effigistic home is to be able to hold space for those reactions, for those responses, but just not act on them. Had I stayed at Jerry's house that night, had I know what I know today, that was a trauma reaction, right, from growing up in the household that I did. If I were just to say, can I use your restroom for a moment, and just gone in there and hung out for a few moments and just allowed that experience to be present, not try to do anything with it, right? Just let it be present, let it run its course, and then come back out and re-engaged, I could have had a very different evening with Jerry and his father. But instead, like many people, when we get flooded with those things and we don't have a conceptual framework for understanding what is going on, all of those feelings convince us that they're true, right? All that pain feels very intense, feels can be almost debilitating. And in the moment, we may even freeze a little bit or just not know what to say or what to do. And that's okay. And that is okay. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you, right? A healthy brain that is brought up in an unhealthy situation will have reactions like that. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It just means that you've been wounded and you have some work to do to recover. If you are finding this conversation helpful, I am going to ask you for a favor. If you could hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and maybe even hit the like button, I would really appreciate it. And here's why that matters. YouTube is trying to figure out what videos of the cajillion that are uploaded every day are going to be the most helpful for people. And so what it does is it looks at how many people are liking a video, how many people are subscribing to a channel, to try to figure out what is going to be some valuable information for people who are jumping onto YouTube. So by clicking on the subscription, you're kind of giving me an upvote, as this is good stuff for people to know. And if you've already subscribed, really appreciate it. And of course, I just appreciate you taking the time to watch the show. Let's get back. All right, let's take a look at some of your questions that you have posted in the comments section on the YouTube videos. And just to let you know, pretty soon I'll have a dedicated place where you can ask questions. We can engage a little bit more in conversation. If you can leave some suggestions for future episodes and things like that. But for right now, let's take a look at some of the ones that came in on the videos. And the first one came in from John, and he said, or asked, why did failure feel safer than success? And what I think John is referring to is once we get in that failed state, sometimes it's like we want to be more successful and we want to engage the world in a better way. We want better relationships. We want to feel happier and more fulfilled. But it's almost like once we start taking the action to do that, once we start putting ourselves in positions where we can be happier and more successful or get into a relationship that is going to feed us, we seem to unravel that, or we have a tendency to backtrack. And it's not always the case, but there's like this weird, even though I'm uncomfortable in this failed state, I know how to operate in this. I have an intuitive sense of how to live in this world. I don't necessarily know how to live in a world where I feel wanted and loved and valued and confident and all of that. And it's like I want those things desperately, but oftentimes I don't really feel like I know how to act there. I don't know how to meet the right people or ask the right questions or say the right things. It's like I don't know how to navigate in that space. And so, part of our recovery is learning how to navigate in a place that is different from existing in this failed space. And now I should mention too that there are some people who it's like everything in their life seems to be a failure. It's like they can't hold a job. They struggle with relationships. They can't seem to make anything work. And then there are others who it's like that failed state may be in an area of their life, and whether that's how they see themselves or their relationships or feeling isolated. They may do fine at work. They may be very, very capable at work, but there's still a piece inside of them that exists in that failed space. And a lot of the reason why it kind of feels safer is that we know how to operate there, and we don't necessarily feel like we're a phony or a fake if we try to step out and act in a healthier way. There's a part of us that feels like everybody can tell that we're a fake, and I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to navigate through this. And so that's an important part of our recovery is getting accustomed to becoming uncomfortable when we are growing in a positive direction. So the second one comes from Debbie. She said, "Why don't I know who I am after growing up this way?" And this is a real struggle with a lot of people, particularly who came from an effigistic household, because it was never safe to be you. It was never safe to be you. And it seemed like no matter what you thought, no matter what you tried, no matter how you tried to differentiate yourself or establish some competency or set some boundaries, you were attacked. And so there was never an opportunity for you to try something and to have people go, "Oh, you are so good at that," or you're great. Yay, you, right? Or reflect back to us like who we are and where we excel and how we, what we're good at and all of those kinds of things. And so because we never had that, and in fact, even more than never had that, whenever we tried to establish that, we were attacked, and that part of us was undermined. Many of us, it's like, I can tell you what I can do, but I can't tell you who I am. It's like, on those questionnaires in books like What Color is Your Parachute, right? They ask things about what's your passion in life and what do you like. And if you grew up in an effigistic household and in a home and you lived in that failed state, you could look at those questions and go, I honestly have no idea. I have no idea who I am. And part of that struggle of who am I will show up in kind of an odd way where we might try to borrow identities from other people. I can remember one time when I was growing up, this is when the movie Rocky first came out, right? So I'm telling you how freaking old I am. But when that movie first came out, it was like, I thought Rocky was so cool that I started, acting like Rocky Balboa in how I talked and all of that. And I'm not from the East Coast, right? I was from Ohio. And so when I was talking about the "Yo, Adrian" kind of thing, my friends are like, "What are you doing?" But that is one of the things that we oftentimes do, right? I mean, we go into different contexts, into different situations, and we look around and try to see how people are acting and then adjust how we present ourselves and who we are to try to fit in, so to speak, because we don't have that kind of internalized core sense of who we are. And that's because it not only was never given space and encouragement to develop, but when we did try to differentiate or stand out in some way and really establish a sense of self, that was attacked. And so part of our job as adults, and it's like, we didn't ask for that, right? But here we are, we're stuck with this, with this sense of identity that needs some development. And so part of our job as adults is to start taking some action to just, establish some what are called internal boundaries around the sense of self of like, know who am I? What do I like? What's important to me? And sometimes we can start by just looking at what are the things that get me excited, right? Do I just love to go skiing and I could do that every day? I mean, there's a part of me that is likely part of my identity that I can kind of latch onto. It's like, you know what? I'm a skier. I love skiing. I'm just gonna embrace that as part of myself. I absolutely love rescuing puppies for whatever, right? I mean, there's something that excites us. And even when we struggle with, who I am, if we start by looking what are some of the things that excite us, that we can at least latch on to some of those, even though we may not have a complete picture yet, we can at least look at some of those things and say, you know what, yes, that is a part of me. That is part of who I am. That is part of my identity. This last question is sent in by Kevin. Why is the parent cruel to me when everyone else loves them? This is such an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? This is a comment that I hear all the time and is certainly one that I experienced. My father was a college professor and he was elected Professor of the Year by the students. Everybody adored him. Everybody thought he was so amazing. And yet, my sister and I had a very different experience, right? Because oftentimes, and somebody who is an effigistic, it is not always that they're just evil people like a sadist would be, right? I mean, they don't want to just go around and hurt everybody. There is oftentimes a part of them that is very, very wounded that they are trying to overcome. And so while their parents may have been very, very cruel to them, they are trying to make up for that in some way by, being compassionate and being nice and being funny and being kind, and everybody loves them. So a lot of times, you can see an effigistic who's like, he's the pastor of the church, or, he's a popular teacher, right? Or he's the mayor of the city, or he's somebody who most people really adore. But because the wound in an effigistic comes from those attachment bonds that they had with their parents, those attachment bonds becomes the conduit through which their effigism emerges. And so an effigistic can be great to people where there's not that kind of emotional connection, where they don't have that attachment bond. But oftentimes what'll happen is once that, when you're talking about a child or you're talking about a partner, once that attachment bond forms, or in a parent-child thing, when they're in that parent-child context, that is when some of that effigistic behavior will come out. And this is one of the things that can be so confusing for a kid, right? It's like, then what is it about me? How come when other people ask my dad to go do something, he's like, oh yeah, let's go hunt, let's go shoot, let's go do whatever, let's go fish, let's go do whatever. But when I ask him, it's this, I don't have time, I'm too busy. I don't have, I can't do it right now. You're just going to have to go take, there's just this real dichotomy. And, as a kid, when you don't really have a frame of reference for understanding that, you start internalizing this idea that, there must be something unique about me that just is unlovable, because look at how everybody else treats him. Look at how he treats everybody else. But then when it comes to me, I get treated like, I am the object of everything he hates about himself, right? And in some ways, that's kind of how it works. And by the way, this is also why in a normal relationship, like a partner relationship between two adults that are starting to date and they're looking at potentially getting married, that attachment bond typically takes anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 years to really form solidly, to where the relationship is organized by that attachment bond. Very early in the relationship, it's a lot of the new relationship energy with all the brain chemicals, and it's just like, oh my God, they're so awesome. And, and then there's lots of sex and everything they say is funny and all of those kinds of things. But a couple years in, that's when the relationship starts to become organized around that attachment bond. And interestingly, that is when a lot of people notice a real shift in the relationship. It's like, oh my God, the person that I thought I knew now is somebody completely different. They never acted toward me this way. They were always super nice and super generous and super funny and all of this kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden we're a couple years in, and man, it's like something has switched. And now it's like they're belittling me, and now they're always cutting me, or not physically cutting, although if they are, that's a real warning sign, but being very degrading, dismissive, all of those kinds of things. And that is a sign that, this might be an effigistic relationship. That kind of pattern also emerges in a narcissistic kind of situation as well, even though the kind of the flavor of each of those looks a little bit different. The kind of behavior toward, that you would experience from your partner looks a little bit different, whether they're a narcissist or effigist. So I just like last week, I just want to thank everybody for the amazing comments and questions. And I do my best to look at them all, but there are a lot. I also have one of my assistants is also reading those, and I have ChatGPT pull them all and organize them and all of that, so I can address as many as I can. And I really appreciate all of your engagement in the questions and all of that, because that tells me that there's something about what I'm doing here that is helpful to you. And that's why I'm here, right? I can talk to myself, anywhere. I'm more interested in doing what is going to be the most helpful for you. So I really appreciate all of the comments and questions and all of that kind of stuff, and keep them coming. Well, that's it for this episode. I hope you found this to be really helpful. And I will plan on seeing you next Sunday when we do this again. I hope you have a great week, everybody. Talk to you soon.